of course, is called Career Insights for the AI Industry. And the general idea of what we're going to cover today is we're going to start off with just a little bit about kind of what is AI, or I know like this term has been thrown around a lot. Like, a lot of people like to talk about AI, like, does your computer have AI? I don't know. So we're going to spend some time kind of just getting everyone up to speed on like the trends of the AI industry, what exactly AI is, and then hopefully later on we can move on to like career paths. And maybe I think some of you might be interested in college choices or AI internships, and just like job outlook in the future in general. So you can kind of just hopefully some food for thought to start to think about, is this something I want to do? I know it's like very exciting, but it's also very important not to get carried away by, all the hype. So it's, hopefully today can be helpful with that. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to spend the first kind of hour-ish. We're going to start off with like a short presentation from Jack, which is our speaker today. And then we're going to go into kind of a time of like prepared questions and answers. So hopefully that'll cover a lot of the things that you're here for today. And then for the last half hour or so, we're going to kind of just open the floor up to open Q&A. So if you have any particular questions, just hold them until the end when we have like an open Q&A, and you can start to ask your questions. And yeah, hopefully we can, hopefully this will be helpful for a lot of you. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Jack, which I guess Jack is the senior principal at a global consulting firm, and he oversees like the strategic AI development there. And previously, Jack has done a lot of has a lot of different experience across like a variety of ML related roles. So I think like in particular, he's a great person to hear from today. A pretty unique path through the AI industry, and hopefully we can learn a lot from him. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Jack.
All right, thanks, Eddie. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let me share my screen real quick. I do have a couple slides I just want to show very briefly. Great. So let me just introduce myself a little bit. I know Eddie did a great introduction. So I'm a senior principal at a global consulting firm. I specialize in AI-related strategies and engineering practices, particular for our consulting firm clients. My team works mainly with Fortune 500 companies on their AI strategies, how they integrate AI into their businesses, and how they leverage AI effectively to get desired return on their investment. I also take on the roles of machine learning architect or cloud architect on very large scale projects to make sure that we are able to deliver the AI models with desired outcomes for our clients. So that's what I do right now. And prior to joining the consulting practice, I was a lead machine learning engineer at a Fortune 100 company. I was leading majority of the machine learning and AI projects in their advertising space, and was heavily involved in project management, technical architecture, and implementing machine learning and AI into the advertising ecosystem. I was also responsible for interviewing, hiring, onboarding engineers onto the team as well. And before that, I had been the CTO and chief scientist for a few startup companies, mainly responsible for delivering AI-based product suites, managing large cross-functional teams, drawing out product roadmaps, designing systems, and of course, hiring the right engineers onto the teams. I should also mention that, I know Eddie talked a little bit about that. My degree is not in computer science or AI in particular. I actually have a PhD degree in biomedical engineering. But very early in my career, I made a transition to data analytics and AI. So if we have time at the end, I can talk a little bit about how I made a career change or transition in the middle. But let's focus on AI right now. That's what today's topic is all about. So AI obviously has received a lot of attention over the past, I'd say 5 to 10 years, right? We have seen very aggressive expansion and very aggressive growth of this particular technology adopted by many, many different industries. And I have some statistics here, just in good old consulting fashion for you. So the AI industry in general has been growing 15.2% year over year. And the current market cap for all the AI related services is $342 billion worldwide. And it has been projected to grow 18.8% in 2022, this next year, with a market cap of $500 billion. So there's a lot of aggressive growth. Companies are making a lot of investment. Obviously, with these huge numbers, there is a huge market here and there are huge potentials. But why is AI so popular now all of a sudden, right? What exactly does AI do that made it grow exponentially over the past 5 years? To me, again, this is really a personal opinion or personal answer, is that AI has opened a new paradigm of computing that is capable of solving a set of new and very challenging problems for us, and especially for various different industries. So if you're familiar with computer science, right? In traditional software engineering, what we do is, we manually program a set of rules, or we call it business logics, in order for a piece of software to function, right? This software relies pretty much entirely on human intelligence. We make it because we're the ones that come up with these rules and we put them into the program so that they function the way we want them to. In AI, however, the software or the model, we call it, learns these rules by itself, and they learn from data. The key word here is learn, right? AI model is able to draw very complex patterns or rules from the data it's given and generalize that pattern to solve very new problems. And this is something that traditional software cannot do. And that's why AI in general has been growing very rapidly. I can give you one very simple example. Everyone has either seen or used voice assistants, right? Whether it's Siri in your iPhone, Amazon Echo, Google Assistant, whatever it may be. We all know this type of application is powered by AI. What that really means is that the model behind these applications learned to understand English, right, through data. And the way we essentially do this is we give the model a huge amount of English conversations, and it was able to devise a pattern for the English language. And now the model is able to use this pattern to understand us when we talk to them. Now, if we want to achieve the same thing using traditional software development, this is very, very difficult to do, because think about how many rules do we need to sort of manually set or input in order to describe the entirety of the English language, right? Probably billions of rules, and that's really an impossible task to accomplish manually. Yet AI can do this very well and can do this very easily. So that's really the power of AI, that ability to learn and the ability to generalize by itself. And it is able to see patterns in very complex data sets, much better than the human eyes. And this is precisely why it's been growing like this in pretty much every industry since the early 2010s. And with that, the job market demand for AI talents has also seen the same growth pattern, right? So you grew from 20,000 vacancies, which is in 2010, to 220,000 job vacancies in 2019. So essentially grew 10 times over 10 years. And I would say right now there is a war on AI talents. It has been one of the most talked about strategic topics for many of my consulting clients. Most of them are having a really difficult time retaining their existing AI engineers, AI talents, and recruiting new ones in this current job market. For example, one of the clients I talked to said they had a goal of recruiting top AI talents this year, and they've invested time, they've invested money, resources into their recruiting effort. And at the end of the year, right, this is end of the year now, they told me they were able to hire 20 new data scientists and machine learning engineers. But in that process, they also lost 19 of their former engineers from their AI division. So after a busy year of recruiting, they essentially increased their talent pool by 1. And that's a huge problem that a lot of companies are facing, that shortage of talents. It is, I think, now more of a systemic problem for many industries. They all want to establish their own AI practice because they do believe that AI is going to be a critical part of their company's future. It's going to be a critical part of their company's business. but they cannot find the right talents in the job market today because AI is still fairly a new technology segment, and universities are not pumping out AI talents fast enough for the industries to hire, especially experienced AI scientists and AI engineers. And finally, before we get to the Q&A conversation with Eddie, I just want to show this this chart here. This sort of gives you an idea of what industries are investing heavily in AI. Software companies and technology services companies are investing heavily in particular. Sure, that makes sense. After all, they are the service providers, right? But if you look at this chart very closely, there are many other industries that are also investing very heavily into artificial intelligence. This includes telecommunication companies like AT&T, retail companies, marketing, advertising companies like Comcast. Financial services is huge as well. There's manufacturing, life science, healthcare, insurance. Those are all big segments. Media entertainment is another. So there's also the energy industry as well. All I can say is pretty much every big sector, every industry is involved in AI at some capacity. And for me personally, I've worked in AI for the last, I would say, 8 to 9 years. And I have worked in many different industries trying to implement AI applications. I've worked in energy industry, the insurance industry, retail, advertising, financial services. And this is something almost every company is looking to get into. So hopefully that gives you a good idea, a good general idea of the current state of the AI industry, where we are, where we're going, how it's been growing and how the companies are investing in it, and what the job market looks like this year and in the near future. So that's it for my slides. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Eddie, let's get to the questions.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for the great intro, Jack. I guess, yeah, let's just get right into the questions. I think the first question that I have is kind of a more personal one before we get into more like general AI career things. And this is just, I guess, for you personally, why are you in this field? Like, what sparked your interest? I mean, coming from like a biomedical engineering background, and then like, was this an accident, or like, you know, somehow this is like something you wanted to do eventually?
Yeah, so my career at this stage is definitely, I would say, not accidental. There's always a rule that I follow when I decide to work on something. That is, I always want to work on something that I'm interested in, right? And the 3 very simple words is follow your curiosity. The reason I'm in AI is because I'm interested in how artificial intelligence works. So very, very simple example, like very early on, like in high school, I was very curious about, you know, how computers work. It's not because I had a job to do or, you know, I had a course or a school project to complete. No, it's just that, you know, when I look at the computer, I always wondered, how does it really work behind the scenes? So I learned a little bit of programming. It was like C++. That gave me some fundamental understanding of computer programming, which was great. But for me, that wasn't, you know, always very satisfying. So I learned a little bit about how compilers work, and finally got to learn a bit about assembly language, which is, you know, fundamentally how computers work, right? So by following instructions on chipsets. If you don't understand the computer science lingo here, that's totally fine. The point I really want to make here is that, you know, personal curiosity will always lead you to something. And usually there are multiple layers of this knowledge that you can explore just by following your own interests. I have interviewed so many software engineers across the past 7 years that treat computer engineering or software engineering just as a job. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I understand that, you know, people need to provide for their family, put food on the table, whatever. And software engineering is a fairly well-paid profession, so they go into this. But I don't see their eyes sparkle, right? When I talk about it with them, I don't see that curiosity. They don't have an intrinsic interest in the topic of computer science from the so many software engineers. And that to me is kind of a shame, because I think it's a great blessing if you your personal interests can align really, really well with your job. so what I want to kind of get across is whatever you decide to do for your career, right? I know we're talking about AI today, but whatever you decide to do, whether it's AI or something else, my suggestion is always to follow your curiosity, because if you enjoy the work that you do, you will always do a better job at it. And by the way, I know we're going to talk about this later. When you're interviewing for big tech companies, that is also something they look for. And they believe in the same thing, essentially. They believe passion drives excellence, right? So be prepared to answer questions like that, right? Why do you want to work in AI? Why are you interested in our company? We can definitely talk a little bit more about big tech interviews later if there are interests.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. But so let me finish real quick. So anyway, that's how I got into computer science in general, right? And then in graduate school, I got really curious about how AI works, because those were just a couple years before the 2010s, and we started to see a trend of really well-recognized AI publications in scientific journals. Convolution networks started to become a thing. So for image processing, everything else. So I started to look into that topic while I was working on a biomedical thesis, right? That pretty much had nothing to do with AI. Again, it's really a personal interest. So I started learning optimizations in math. I learned to program in Python, all in free time, pretty much. Again, technical terms are not important here, but for me, curiosity drove me to AI, because I wanted to know how it works. I wanted to learn more about it, and that's how I got into AI, really through this kind of personal passion and personal interest. And today, fast forward, similar pattern. I'm curious of how business works with technology. So I got into consulting. I now learned how to talk, not just technical aspects of AI. I learned to talk about AI strategy with senior executives. I learned how to sell things. I learned how to talk about return on investment. I learned how to frame business problems from a technical aspect. I learned a lot from consulting. I'm really happy I made that transition from a pure technical engineer to a consultant. So now you see a pattern, right? Why am I in the AI industry? Why is my career the way it is? Because I am a curious person and I wanted to learn more and work on these interests of mine. So that's really the bottom line. And by the way, also 5 years ago, I started to learn computer graphics and 3D programming, because I really wanted to know how computer games are made. It's a very innocent reason, because for me, they seem just so different from all these other computer software. So I got into OpenGL's game engines. I worked on augmented reality, virtual reality projects, again, purely out of personal interest. I personally did not imagine I was going to turn these things into a career, but we all know recently the concept of metaverse is catching on very, very fast. Every big tech company is working on it, and guess what? And all of these sort of 3D programming knowledge that you invested time in now becomes very useful in building metaverse per se. And I don't know, maybe I'll be working on a metaverse project sometime in the future. But again, I had no idea metaverse was a thing. And when I was starting out in AI, I had no idea AI was going to be this big, right? But now all of these knowledge I accumulated just became another career option for me. So all I'm saying is, there are a lot of benefits by following and exploring your own interests. And it's the best case scenario when you can develop your own interests into a career. And that's definitely the case for me.
Right. I mean, I definitely agree. I think you bring up a really good point, which is like passion is super important. And I think like I agree with the fact that I think it's what like one of the great things about being in AI is like the skills that you learn in this field are pretty, like you're not locked into one thing. There's a ton of different things you can do. There's a ton of different applications of the things that you're learning. So yeah, it's just a huge field. And even if you don't like AI in general, you still have, there's a lot of options for you. I think like personally, I was just super interested in self-driving cars a few years ago, and that kind of got me into it. But yeah, I guess kind of building onto this, like, how do you think someone that thinks they might be interested in AI should like try it out? Like, do you have any suggestions for, I guess, like fun, like, things that someone can do, or like resources or something? Just like, what are some, I know someone in the chat was asking about like how to inspire middle school kids to get interested in it. Although like, I want to say like, we'll have like open questions later. So try to hold your questions until then. But yeah, how do you think like someone might get some exposure to it, or some resources?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually struggled a lot very early on when I tried to understand how AI works, because at the time there wasn't a whole lot of free online resources available, and all I had was scientific papers that were published by these big guys in artificial intelligence research. But today is different, right? There are many free resources available for you online on the internet. If you want to know something, you just search for it. But I would say that there is a particular path that I would suggest that you follow, especially for someone who is not exposed to the AI industry yet, and you want to kind of get your feet wet and try it out a little bit to see if this is your cup of tea. So the first thing I would recommend to anybody who's interested in AI is to look at this machine learning course by Andrew Ng from Stanford University. It's on Coursera. That course gives you, by the way, not associated with Coursera or Andrew Ng. Not saying this is the course I took when I was in grad school, by the way. That helped me really started my AI career. So, but anyway, that course gives you a mix of programming and mathematics. It teaches you like really the fundamentals of AI and neural networks. Take a look at that. And if you find that course is particularly your cup of tea and you think you want to learn more after that, there are courses taught by other people like Google DeepMind at University College London on YouTube. Those are really, really good as well. You should definitely check it out after you master the fundamental course. If you, after taking Andrew Ng's course, you said, okay, this is a little bit too much, then maybe take a step back and think about whether AI is the right thing for you. Because to me personally, AI sits in the intersection between mathematics and computer science, right? If you're purely interested in math and you're lacking the computer science part of it, AI doesn't really work. And if you're only focused on computer science and you lack some of these mathematical fundamentals, then you can't really understand how AI works. So it kind of really requires both sides of the things. And that course really gives you a balance and sort of show you if you are going to be working in AI, what are some of these problems that you'll be facing. And once you have some of these courses under your belt, you're free to explore many other topics in AI because you already have sufficient fundamental understanding in the topic. And in terms of how you gain experience in AI, especially as a student, right? You're not working in a company. How do you get your hands-on experience? And there are a couple of solutions for this. There is a place to do that. It's called Kaggle.com. Actually, I don't know if anyone, maybe ID has heard about it. They have Kaggle.com essentially hosts a lot of data sets from different companies. They even have competitions, by the way, to win monetary prize for your work. Go on there, pick a data set and practice. That's the best way to gain hands-on experience. And once you're done with the project, if it's a public data set, put your work on GitHub, right? Let everyone see it, make it open, make it public. Let everyone see what you have done. This is, again, especially important if you don't have a lot of industry experience. Put your personal projects or put your school projects on display, and then put that link on your resume and let the recruiter see. That's how you accumulate your credential and your experience over time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I remember I took the same class, like the Andrew Ng class, a few years ago, I think before I took calculus, and I didn't understand half of it because I hadn't taken calculus.
Right.
But I think like, yeah, it's just super important. Also, I think to keep in mind, even if you don't, like, even if you're super confused by it at first, especially since like, I think a lot of you are in middle school or high school, just like, it's super important not to like lose picture of why you're interested in it and to like keep track of like things that are cool, I think. And I know that like, even if you don't have like a super technical background, like Google has this like teachable machine demo that you can like play with. Like you can upload your own pictures and build your own like classifier that classifies between different like classes of images. And I think these like little demos are just interesting to look at. Um, but yeah, it's definitely useful to dive into things. I think I'm gonna go a little bit off script here. Um, I just want to like ask you briefly before we go into like careers. I guess like what are you most excited about for the AI industry going into the future? Like what are the topics that you think are like, most exciting to think about?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I think now there are many industries that are leveraging very conventional AI algorithms nowadays. So it's not a huge surprise. But one industry in particular I've been keeping a tab on, maybe it's because of my major, is the life science industry. Everybody kind of knows that the life science industry tends to be slower in adopting newer technologies, especially AI, because AI usually drives decision making. And in life science, that sometimes means life and death, right? So for example, I have worked on several image sort of recognition or image processing projects where we look at a picture of somebody's cells and determine whether there are cancer cells in there, right? So it's a very sort of standard usage, but to this day, I don't think there's any hospital systems or there's any clinics that have adopted a full-on AI-based image processing to determine whether someone has cancer or not. Why? Because it is too risky. Any mistake that the AI model makes is going to make someone cry or someone laugh. So if you think about the implication of a false positive or false negative diagnosis for someone, if you tell someone that he or she has cancer, but the truth is he or she doesn't, think about the impact it's going to make on that person's life. So I think what I'm really excited about is the continued advancement of AI to a certain point that we trusted it enough to put it into life science and into the hospital system. Not too long ago, I think a few months ago, I think DeepMind, which is a research division from Google, they came up with a protein folding algorithm. It's called AlphaFold 2, actually. And it was able to correctly, I think at 95% accuracy, 93% accuracy, to predict protein folding. If you don't have a biological background, but that's fine too. But in biology, that basically means DeepMind just solved a 50-year-old scientific problem that no biologists or biochemists have solved over the past 5 decades. Protein folding is very important. It's because if the protein is not folded in the right way, it's not going to function in the human body. And if it doesn't function properly, then we get all sorts of diseases. So it's a very critical step in understanding disease development, disease progression. And in turn, it's very important for drug discovery and drug screening. And before AlphaFold 2 was there, scientists are using a very manual process to crystallize these proteins, to observe them under a microscope, take images to try to figure out exactly what the configuration of the proteins are. Now we have a pretty accurate algorithm in AI to help us move along this research space. So hopefully that the drug discovery phase will become much, much faster. That's one thing that I'm really, really excited about, which is the advancement of AI in life science. The second thing is, the continued advance in AI technologies. Recently, there's something called reinforcement learning that's been taking over headlines. Eddie's smiling because he knows. Reinforcement learning is very powerful. It's because it has this capability to make continued decision, right? If we think about a traditional AI algorithm, image processing algorithm, you give the model the image, and then the model will be able to identify what's in the image, and that's it. But a reinforcement learning model it is able to make continuous decisions. So for example, if you want the robot to walk, right? How do you make sure that the robot stays in balance every single time, even if the terrain is not a flat surface, right? How does it climb hills? How do you make a robot be able to travel across vast different types of terrain? The answer is reinforcement learning, because if you have a reinforcement learning model in the robot will be able to make continuous decision to balance itself across very difficult terrain to navigate. Eddie is interested in self-driving cars. Actually, self-driving cars use reinforcement learning as well to make sure that decisions that the model is making is safe and to make sure that the passengers get to their destination. So that's the second area that I'm really interested in. Again, this is something that I'm keeping a very close eye on. And I know that Eddie has another question on the negative implications of these technologies. I'll talk a little bit about that as well later on when we get to that question.
Yeah.
So those are the things I'm really excited about, just to keep an eye on the continued development and research in AI.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if it goes well, we can have like super, tons of like robotic helpers and stuff around interacting with humans. And this human interaction part of AI is also something that no one knows how to do well. And like, especially, I think you mentioned like doctors and life scientists, no one understands how it works well enough to like even put like reasonable safeguards that are like, and around like interacting between like a doctor and an AI system. But that's, yeah, we can get into that a little bit later. So I guess I want to move on a little bit to like AI careers.
Sure.
So I guess like the first question will be pretty broad in terms of like, AI is just a very broad field, right? So like what are kind of like when people think of a career in AI, I'm not sure if like a lot of people have a very clear picture of what that looks like. So like what are the different things that you can actually do when you get into AI as a field?
Yeah, I agree. AI is a very broad field. So there are many things that one can focus on. So from a technical aspect of this, for example, there are subfields in AI like natural language processing, right? That's the method for which chatbots and voice assistants use. There is also computer vision that focuses on image processing, like self-driving cars or detecting defects on production lines, detecting cancer in medical imaging. These are all examples of computer vision application. And there's also predictive analytics, right? That can predict customer behaviors, employee churn, revenue, stock prices, among other things. Hedge funds use predictive analytics a whole lot because they need to make investments. So there are many things, many different aspects of AI to choose from. Each one of these has its own sort of applications and use cases. You can do a lot of different things with it. And for me personally, I have been more of an AI generalist. By the way, that's an option as well. So as a generalist, I can understand these subfields and I have enough working knowledge in every single discipline. A lot of these experiences accumulated over the years as I work on different types of projects. But starting out in AI, I would definitely suggest you pick something to focus on, then branch out into other disciplines. There's also an added benefit of working in AI, and there are hundreds of AI startups every single year. So if entrepreneurship is your thing and you have enough working knowledge in AI, starting a company is definitely not out of the question. That's something you can do as well.
Right. So I guess like, I think like going on, there's also kind of this other spectrum of like AI jobs or people in AI that are focused on research, like that are in like some like lab or like a professor in a university or something. And then there's also other people that are really like focused on the product or like delivering some like Google Assistant or some sort of like, user-facing product. Like how do you kind of like figure out if you want to focus on like how do these fields, first of all, how do they interact? And then second of all, like how do you focus on like decide which one you're interested in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I kind of want to answer the second question first, actually. So generally speaking, when you look at AI jobs, there are two very broad categories of job postings in AI. One is on the research side. Typically, this is titled as AI researcher or AI research scientist, something along those lines. This type of position typically requires a PhD degree, right? They're focused on discovering new AI methods, and they're usually being evaluated on how many scientific papers they publish and how significant those papers are for the academic field of AI. So this is one type of AI jobs. You usually work with professors in universities and things like those. The other type is more, I would say, engineering related for the industry, right? These are typically titled as machine learning engineers or data scientists. These positions are industry positions focused on bringing business values through AI. And they're focused more on the implementation of AI systems. For example, to make sure that the system is speedy, it's scalable, it's reusable, it's secure, all of those kind of engineering related things. I would say these industry positions are more sort of a practical use of AI versus trying to discover the cutting edge of AI. So that's really the key difference for me. And companies that hire for these positions usually have a business to run. So they're focused on return on investment instead of scientific discovery. So those two can be very, very different. And it depends on what piques your interest. You should definitely choose accordingly. And as to how they interact, so there is actually a fair amount of interaction between research and engineering because AI is such a new sort of topic. A lot of machine learning engineers, when the companies hire machine learning engineers, they prefer that you have an academic background and you have the capability to read scientific research papers. By the way, this is something not everybody has, right? You have to train it in a certain way to be able to understand the math and all of that scientific writing that's going on in these research papers. And the reason is because a lot of these companies would like to take advantage of the newest, the hottest research, the algorithms that came out of university research. A lot of them, in fact, do, especially Fortune 100 companies. They have this explicit sort of small fine print requirement that says, anybody who has an academic background or be able to read scientific publications preferred. So that's a skill set that I find a lot of engineers lack, and that's definitely something that people should try to gain that ability to do.
Yeah, sounds good. I think, yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's like a huge amount of, or like the engineering is well, actually quite new to me. Because a lot of my exposure is more researchy, but I think like, yeah, it's very cool. I guess like before I move on, I know a lot of people in the chat are like really, they want to know what the resources you mentioned earlier are. So I just want to make sure that's addressed before we move on. I think you mentioned like Andrew Ng's class.
Yep.
And then some other like other courses afterwards.
Yep. So yeah, let me
just very briefly.
Yeah, I can type those in. I don't have direct links, but you can look at Coursera. I don't even know if I spelled Coursera.org, and then you can look for machine learning by Andrew Ng and Stanford University. So that's one. I just typed it in. Let me see if I can put this for everyone. Yes, I can. So that's one course you can look at. And then there's on YouTube, there's DeepMind machine learning courses. They did it together with UCL, which is the University of College London. You can just search for that on YouTube. You'll be able to see a series of courses that they did last year that includes general machine learning and reinforcement learning as well. So those are really good ones. And by the way, on Coursera, there are also other machine learning courses that are more of not so much focused on the fundamental, but focused on different types of applications. So once you get through the engineering standard course, you can look at all these other machine learning courses as well. So a lot of resources there. Hopefully that clears things up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's people can look at some of those. I think personally, I'm of the opinion that like doing too many of these will you'll bore yourself to death, especially as like a middle or high schooler. Yeah, like try not. I don't think that like you should have such of a big of an emphasis on like taking course after course after course. Or like I guess when you get older, it's like you're reading paper after paper after paper. It's like very easy to fall into this trap, and that's like not helpful. I think like especially for middle or high schoolers, it's pretty important to like expose yourself to a lot of the applications.
Yeah,
and like a lot of like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you because these courses do require working knowledge of calculus and Python. So if you're in middle school or high school and you haven't really touched calculus yet, these courses are going to be more difficult for you. So in the meantime, if you really want to get into AI, but still don't have that fundamental mathematics behind you, like Eddie said, focus on some of the applications, get a general understanding of how AI works also help. So
yeah, certainly. I mean, there's plenty of time. I think this is something I need to learn too, but there's a lot of time to learn things. I think I guess moving on, I think I'd like to come back to like AI career in terms of like different like horizontals or like different places that it's being used, but we'll do some of that later. I think I want to focus now on kind of just school or how to learn things like this. So I think like, I guess in terms of AI careers, how much formal school do you think you need? Like either like in terms of like directly focusing on AI or other types of like learning. And does this vary based on the type of job?
yeah, it's a really broad question. I would say I would say it depends on the particular job that you're looking for in AI. The preferred school degrees could vary. For most industry jobs, a college degree or a master's degree is sufficient. Though some positions do prefer a master's degree over a bachelor degree. Those are typically the more senior positions. That doesn't mean a PhD degree is out of contention for this type of positions. I've seen plenty of candidates applying for industry jobs with a PhD degree. I would say it doesn't hurt your chances per se, but most of the time it doesn't necessarily give you an advantage either of having a PhD degree. So it all depends on your experience, background, and how you actually perform during the interviews. I'm sure Eddie knows like the technical interviews really depends on your performance of the day. It's not so much of what kind of degree you have. So that's for industry positions. And for research type of position that I talked about, a PhD is almost always required because they really need that particular person to understand how research goes and how to write scientific publications. And this is mainly because, you know, in order to do research effectively and write and publish papers, you require a special kind of training. So getting a PhD definitely helps you with that. It is also a very common perception that if someone has a PhD degree, that means, you know, that person has been in school longer and that person has stronger fundamentals in math and science, or that person has stronger analytical abilities, which, you know, is necessary to work in AI. So most of the time, higher degree gives you a slight edge in the resume review process. It's definitely a bright spot during the screening process. However, once the screening process is complete and you actually get into the interview stage, degrees usually don't matter all that much. And it's you and your ability to problem solve that matters the most.
Right. Yeah, I think that's, well, I think maybe like this is a little bit further down the line for some people. Like especially thinking about going to doing a PhD, that's like many, many years down the line.
Right.
I guess more relevantly, short term, well, I guess like let's start with like high schoolers. So I'm not sure, like maybe I'll talk a bit about this later too, but I guess for high schoolers that want to eventually get into AI or get into like majors that are related to AI, do you have any thoughts on like extracurriculars or competitions that might help when you're applying to college?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I applied to college, so you may be better suited to answer this question because I'm not sure exactly what college is looking for nowadays. But there are definitely a couple of things that come to mind. Like I said, if you're junior or senior in high school and you've taken calculus and you already have that fundamental knowledge, definitely get into AI. Kaggle, get some practice. Kaggle definitely helps. You've done a few projects there, even if you have a ranking in Kaggle, that helps with your college application, I'm sure. That tells college that you're dedicated and you know what you want to do. That kind of passion and dedication definitely helps with your admission. Another thing that's really useful, I think, is, you know, if you've participated in, you know, open source projects of some kind, maybe, I don't know if it's too much for high schoolers. There are many out there. Have you worked on any of these? If you've submitted a branch and got accepted, that definitely also helps. But I'll leave the rest of the question to Eddie and see what did you do in high school to get into a good college?
I think I'm very conflicted generally when I talk about college admissions. Because also I don't really know very much either. I think I mean, I'd like to say that like you should just focus on your passion and don't worry too much about college admissions, but I know that's not like realistically going to be the case. I think um, uh, I think like what's helpful is maybe you can like it's hard to specialize on AI on such like a young age, I think. Like a lot of people that go into AI are like interested in maybe a more broader field too, like computer science or something. And I think it's useful to do some more like broad extracurriculars and just like explore the space a little bit. And I think like the most important thing is just to like do things that show that you're passionate in something. Or maybe like on some other sense, like leadership is important, but I know that's like not really related to AI. So or like you can like leadership is important, I think, regardless. But I think just like trying to show your passion, doing like computer science related competitions or something, they're pretty easily translatable into AI. And I think a lot of colleges don't really have like AI specific majors. So you're going to be going in as like a computer science major anyway. And I think having this like good CS background. And if you're really interested in AI, you can like do other, maybe like if you have like AI related clubs, or you can try to find some sort of like maybe professor at some college that can like help you through some project or something that you're building. I think like a lot of people like try to emphasize the importance of working on like side projects by yourself, um, or side projects with a group of people that are related to AI. And I think that's helpful too, if not only for college, but also for like your own personal knowledge and growth. Um, but like, don't make that like, it's not like you have to do side projects to get into AI or something. It's just something that like, it's really useful to do if you want to build your knowledge. And like, it's also really useful to do. It's like, it like switches the order in which you learn things. Like instead of learning things from a class, you're learning what you need to learn based on like, if you want to build some projects. And I think that's helpful. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that answers the question kind of. So I guess like going into college then, like are there like what types of majors do you think are useful for AI? I think like other than computer science, and like how do you like what types of classes do you think you should take, or like other like things you could do in college if you're interested? Um,
Yeah, there are plenty of things you can do in college. As far as major goes, I know that some universities have specific machine learning courses, and they put it online. There are Stanford courses, there are MIT courses. I'm sure some other universities also have machine learning courses.
I know CMU has we have machine learning courses too.
Yeah, exactly. If you're interested in AI, take those courses, right? That's almost a no-brainer. And like Eddie said, most of the time AI or machine learning is not a major in college, but rather a subfield of computer science. So if you want to get into AI, maybe you're looking at a computer science major and take those courses. Just because you're working in AI doesn't mean the computer science fundamentals not important anymore. Because when we interview, we do look at your computer science fundamentals, right? We still do tech interviews, see how your programming skills are measured up against other programmers. So take AI courses, but also make sure that the algorithm courses that you're taking are not missing those as well. So those are some of the college courses I would suggest. Another aspect of this is the mathematics course, right? If you can take 4 years worth of calculus, do that. Whether it's linear algebra or calculus or some other higher level math courses, do that. Those are only going to sort of broaden your options for you later on, whether you are pursuing a master degree or a PhD degree later on in school. So those are my suggestions as far as courses go. And in terms of for your own sort of a personal projects or something that you want to work on personally, there are a couple of things. Again, I bring this up over and over. Kaggle.com, go do it. It's something, especially if you don't have industry background and you're looking for a job in AI, having personal project, showing the employers that you've done it before is extremely important, even if the model is not in production, right? That's too much to ask for a personal project. But as far as my understanding goes, when I screen my resume, especially for people who don't have professional experience, their personal project become the only measuring stick I have against all these other applicants. So having a reservoir of personal AI projects is very important. And again, taking those online courses also help, but don't overdo it. Like Eddie said, it will get you a little bit flustered and sometimes confused. But those are all the things that I would suggest you do if you really truly want to pursue an AI related career.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think like on top of this, I guess it's also my impression that a lot of AI, or like I think it's pretty valuable to have like, or I guess like from my view, it seems like it's very useful to have a lot of different perspectives when you're working on AI, because like it's such a broad field and it touches so many things. So if you're interested in doing AI, it's not like you can't be interested in other things too. Like I think there's a lot of like neuroscientists that are really like getting into the AI field because they're like really interested in how the brain works, and they bring a really unique perspective to the table in terms of like, they've studied, how neurons and like different like visual systems in our brain work, and I think it's very helpful. And like, maybe there's like, maybe you're very interested in AI for a certain application, and so if you're interested in like certain domains, I think it's also helpful to study that in college. Because like you never know when it'll be helpful later. Yeah, I think I guess like besides school though, what types of skills do you think are useful? Like maybe technical or non-technical that would be useful when you're like in the ML or AI fields?
Yeah, I think there are many important skills that school doesn't necessarily teach you, right? But you have to learn either on the job or on your personal time. I would say some of these qualities transcend through different industries. It doesn't have to be AI, but in interviewing people, I think one of the most important thing is communication. How good you are at communication kind of tells me how good you are on the job, whether you're a team player, right? When you're working on a project in the industry, you're not working alone. So you will have to clearly communicate with your teammates, more importantly, with your managers. Another is, do you show leadership initiatives, right? Are you proactive at solving challenging problems? All of these are like important qualities and skills that one should have on the job. These are more general qualities. Like I said, it doesn't matter which industry you're in, you should definitely have those. As for AI more specifically, I definitely think you should have sufficient mathematics background, because it doesn't matter whether you are doing AI research or AI engineering. It is your responsibility to know how AI works, and in itself requires fundamental understanding of AI system, which involves a lot of math. That's just the way it is. There's no way around it. I've mentored some junior engineers that said, hey, I want to get into AI, but those math really confuse me. What do? I said, go brush on your mathematics, because without understanding those, you can't really understand how AI works. Another skill I already mentioned is having the ability to read academic papers is another very important skill. AI research is an extremely active community. There are papers published every week, and as someone working in the AI industry, yeah, you're laughing because it's too hard to keep up, right? So I get the same feeling. So as someone working in the AI industry, you should be able to understand these academic papers. Having the ability to translate these academic results into industry applications is very critical for you to be successful in AI, at least right now. So those are the things I would say are some of the skills that school doesn't necessarily give you, but that you should definitely have.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, this is kind of crazy. I think like, I know someone earlier was wondering where these papers are, and like everyone just pushes their papers onto some like this website called Archive, which is like, it's called ARXIV. And it's just way too many papers because it's open access, which like the biology community doesn't do, or no other community really does this, but all of the papers are just there. And yeah, it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah, I actually have a recommendation on that topic. There's a website called Papers with Code. Go do that instead. Don't look at the archive or Google search it. Don't do that. Just there are, so Paper with Code, that website, if you search, there are like a recommendation system or a star system. You can look at the most starred paper, and from there you can see the importance and whether most people deem it likable or not likable. And the best part of this is the papers on there all have a GitHub repository, so you can look at how the authors actually implemented the algorithm instead of just reading the mathematics. So that's another resource I would use.
Yeah, I agree. I think like half of you read the paper and you still don't know how to implement it, because exactly. Like half of the important things are in the implementation detail. I think yeah, I guess I also like Archive Sanity by Carbothy. Okay. Yeah, that's. But then also like a lot of my like reading is just like from Twitter. I guess people post about their papers a lot. Yeah, I guess moving on. When you're actually applying to a career, um, do you have any like interview tips, or what do employers look at on your resume? What do they, well, I think you've mentioned like personal projects, but how do you, yeah, what are some tips that you have for getting jobs?
Yeah, I have some advices. I've interviewed probably a few hundred people over the past few years, and typically in an interview, whether it's face-to-face interview or through video or on your resume, it doesn't matter. There are general signals that people look for about their prospective candidates. For example, one thing that they really value, a lot of big tech companies really value, is motivation. They want to understand why you're interested in technology or why you're interested in AI. Why do you want to do this? Why are you applying to their company instead of some other companies, right? If you cannot reflect these values in your resume, put it in your cover letter. I read it, we read it. So typically so back to motivation. Typically there are two types of motivations. There's intrinsic motivation, there's extrinsic motivation. When we talk about intrinsic motivation, these are all the things that interviewer look for, by the way. So when we talk about intrinsic motivation, these are things like, I play soccer because I enjoy the activity. That's an intrinsic motivation. I like solving puzzles because I find the challenge exciting and fun. Maybe I like studying something because I find the subject fascinating or I have a personal interest in it. Things like those, things that come from yourself, right? From yourself somewhere in you, that you just find this topic fascinating or interesting. That's intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation are things like, I play soccer because I can win awards, right? Or I'm competing in a contest because I need a scholarship. Or I want to work in AI because it's well paid or it's hot. These are extrinsic motivations. And as you can imagine, companies much prefer candidates who have very strong intrinsic motivations, something that comes from the candidates themselves, not external factors like awards or money or recognition or something else, right? So that's the first thing they look for. Do you have intrinsic motivation? The second thing, really important thing they look for is something we call proactivity, right? Are you proactive when working on a project? Are you willing to help out teammates or other members? Or are you just satisfied with just completing your assignments and that's it, right? The overall goal here really is to evaluate the candidate's sense of scale, right? Are you willing to take on more responsibilities, having larger or longer vision by helping others to ensure that the project at the end is successful? Or do you only care about yourself and finishing your own assignment is good enough for you? There's a clear differentiator between these two types of people. And again, you can imagine companies prefer proactive employees, team players instead of the individuals who only think of themselves or don't care much about project goals or company goals in general. And are you willing to go to the extra mile to do more, right? That's another important aspect of this. And an example I can give you is, I currently mentor 5 to 6 junior engineers. Some of them come to me and say, hey, Jack, I think I've done, a great job with my assignments, right? I always finish on time. I have good feedback from clients. I've done everything that I can to make sure that I complete my tasks with a great degree of care, right? I deliver excellent projects. But when it comes to promotion, I don't seem to have an advantage over others like I thought I did. So why is that, right? Why is there not a promotion for me if I'm doing a good job on my projects? Well, if you think about it, from your employer's perspective, right? Completing your projects or completing your tasks nicely and timely is a basic requirement for your employment. Your company pays you for you to do a good job on these tasks you're assigned to. Just because you did a great job at it doesn't warrant a promotion. It just means you completed your job and you get paid for it. Promotions, typically, if you're in those like career committee or something, promotions are given to those who go above and beyond. I'll say this again. Just because you did a great job at your assigned projects, it does not warrant a promotion. Promotions are given to those who go above and beyond, right? It's given to people who are willing to take on more responsibilities, who are more proactive, who are willing to help others to ensure projects are successful, who are actively asking, what else can I do to help the team? Those are the people who their managers take notice and get a promotion. So during the interview process or on your resume or cover letter, make sure you can clearly communicate your proactiveness, right? How do you help others to be successful while ensuring you also are successful? That's an important factor that companies are looking for. And that brings us to the third quality, which is communication. I don't know how to stress how important this is, but it is very, very important. And unfortunately, most of the time, school doesn't really teach you this. So for example, I've worked with colleagues in the past couple of years ago where, their assigned projects were late. This by in itself is not a big deal. If you can, clearly communicate and tell me that, hey, because of personal reason or whatever reason that my project is going to be delayed. Maybe something really, really unfortunate happened to you or your family or something. You just have to adjust priorities. We all have a life outside of work. Perfectly okay reasons to be late. However, in that particular project, that particular person didn't tell me ahead of time. So on the day when I was expecting really the project to finish, I didn't see anything, right? And this is especially important to understand for, I would say, junior engineers and engineers who are just getting into the industry, because sometimes the project you're working on is only a part of a much bigger system. So maybe from the junior engineer's perspective, it's only late for 2 weeks, not a big deal. But for other team members or for other managers, and for me in particular, I kind of have to reshuffle, rearrange priorities, everything else sort of downstream, right? So there's a whole lot of unnecessary work that I kind of had to do on the engineer's behalf because the engineer was late and didn't tell me ahead of time. If he or she tells me, and then I can rearrange ahead of time, but he or she didn't, so I couldn't do that. So I kind of want to stress this is the importance of communication. This is one of the most important signs interviewers look for when they talk to you. Can you clearly communicate your objectives? Are you willing to communicate or describe certain situations? Can you do that clearly? Do you have the mindset of constantly keeping everyone else in the loop during your previous projects? These are all important qualities to have. And if you can't communicate clearly, then you essentially fail the interview, unfortunately. I have seen so many engineers who are great technically, right? They pass the tech interview, they pass their machine learning design interview, no problems. But when they get to the behavior interview, when the company wants to sort of learn these general qualities of this particular person, the engineer falls short because they just couldn't communicate very well with what they have done before and what their strengths are, weaknesses are, and they usually fail at that stage. And another one of these that they want to get out of you is your ability to perform conflict resolution. So this is when you disagree with someone on the team, how do you resolve that conflict? It's actually much harder than it sounds, right? Because if you think about conflict resolution, this actually contains a couple of different qualities. One is your willingness to stand behind your ideas. If you and your teammate disagree on a particular approach, technically, or a particular architecture, and when you think you are right, are you willing to stand by your arguments and not back down, even when you are confronting your manager about it, right? Don't compromise when you think you're right. This is a very important quality. Generally, companies are looking for quote unquote nice employees, but there is a difference between being a nice person and being a compromisable person. So I would say, be a nice person to others, but when it comes to work, don't compromise. This is very important that the company understands you have the backbone to stand by your own sort of solution or technical architecture when others disagree with you. The second quality within conflict resolution is actually the other aspect of it is, do you have empathy, right? When there's an argument, are you able to see something from the other person's perspective? Can you understand where your teammates are coming from or why they disagree with you? This is an important quality too that big tech companies look for in their managers, especially. As a manager, you have to resolve conflict very often, and having empathy and understanding is key to being a successful manager. So that's conflict resolution. They look for both you having a backbone to stand by your solution, but also empathy at the same time. So you have to possess both of these qualities and use them kind of at the right time. And the last thing I want to say is, be prepared to answer questions like, why this company, right? For example, if you're interviewing for Facebook or Meta, they're called now, be prepared to answer questions like, why would you like to join Meta? What attracts you to Meta? And be prepared to answer company-specific objectives. Like, if you're interviewing for Meta, you better be able to talk about the metaverse, because that's what they're building. That's what they're going for. If you don't have a very strong and passionate reason, then they know you're there for the prestige and money, right? That's very easy to vouch. And that's not a signal you want to give off to your interviewer. So prepare a good reason, read up on what they're doing, right? Be able to answer why Meta, why Microsoft, why Apple, right? What are your opinions on their products, right? What are your opinions on, I'll keep using Facebook as an example. What are your opinions on the metaverse, right? Why do you want to work on it? So forth and so on, right? It's also very important to not give me standard answers when I ask you this, right? I want your opinion. If you give me a standard response that you clearly read from a news article, right? That is very boring. I can read news articles too, right? I know the public perception of Meta, for example. You don't have to regurgitate that content back to me, back to the interviewer. So I would say, have an opinion, have some thought leadership, think about why you would like to join these big tech companies, if that's your goal. If you are already in the tech industry and you're experienced hire, then in that instance, can you tell me why every big tech company is working on the metaverse, for example? Do you know their approaches or how they differentiate from each other? Do you know their strategy or approaches? How does AI factor into all of this? If you don't have a good answer, then you probably don't have an opinion or you didn't bother thinking about it. Again, not a good signal you want the interviewers to get, right? The general idea is that your interviewer is trying to find out whether your mind is in the tech industry, right? If you are thinking about the biggest topics and the hottest topics in the industry, and whether you are following the development of the industry in general, right? Not just in AI, but also in other topics. Like, if you have interest in distributed system, are you into, Bitcoin systems, for example? Or are you into 3D graphics, or do you understand metaverse or VR or AR? So any other sort of related things, if you have any interest or you have any projects in those areas, tell your interviewer, because that shows that you are a 3D person, right? You're well-rounded. You're not just focused on a single thing and you don't know anything else about it, or you don't care about anything else. So these are all very important behavior qualities companies look for. So when you're interviewing, make sure, or on your resume or cover letter, make sure you show off these qualities. Another set of qualities that are also very important are technical capabilities, of course. Being an engineer and applying for an engineering position, you have to have technical capabilities. So in this instance, for example, having deeper understanding of AI systems is always a good thing. You need to be able to clearly differentiate your technical capabilities from others. So for example, I've encountered this so many times. Let's say, there's a candidate and he's a machine learning engineer, and he knows how to use TensorFlow. Great. All right. By the way, TensorFlow is a machine learning library that people use very, very often. Right? Everyone that works in the AI industry knows. So I would ask, so what? So what you know how to use TensorFlow? Because I can find 200 other applicants who can also use TensorFlow. What makes you so different? One thing that makes you stand out is if you can show me you understand how TensorFlow works, right? Behind the scenes, that's going to be very impressive. maybe it's a little harder to understand when I talk about this sort of AI example, but if we can switch the context a little bit, let's talk about cars, right? Car is a tool, it's a travel tool. Pretty much everyone past a certain age can drive a car. Great, you know how to use a tool. I asked the same question, so what? Do you know how a car actually works, right? Can you make a car? That's the differentiator, right? In this case, I would say, when you are interviewing, don't show off with an impression that you are a driver, because everybody can be a driver. Be a manufacturer or be a car mechanic. That's the really impressive part when you are in a technical interview. I think another very clear example is, everyone knows how to turn lights on and off, right? Flip a switch. But do you actually know how electricity works? Do you know how electricity actually get to your home? Most people don't. Again, during an interview, don't just be a user of electricity, because everyone can do that. It doesn't make you stand out. Be a physicist that can explain how electricity works for me. That's impressive. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, don't be satisfied at this superficial level of understanding of AI, right? You know how to use a tool, great. So what? So can everybody else. Show you have more depth. Show you can understand difficult technical subjects. You're not afraid to tackle these challenging problems. Show off something that others don't have. And that usually leaves a very strong impression with your interview.
Yeah, I think that's a very complete answer. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think a lot of the times it's like interesting, or it's like important, or people frame interviews as like you are the one being interviewed. But I think it's also interesting to look at it as kind of a conversation on some level. Because it's like, I mean, they ask you a question, maybe the question is like, you should clarify the question before you actually answer the question. If you're confused about it, because like, you don't want to just randomly answer some random question that you make up.
Right.
But yeah, I guess I do want to like give some people some time for their own questions. So I'm gonna ask a few more, and then I think we're gonna wrap up and move over to everyone else. I guess I do want to ask like one maybe shorter question on what do you think about like career path, or do you think that like career path, like the typical career path, does it exist? Like, is there some way of like benchmarking yourself, like, oh, I'm on a good path to get an AI career? Or I guess like, what do you think about that?
That's a really good question. I think as far as career path goes, it's very similar to all other sort of computer science, technical engineer career path. I personally haven't seen that much of a difference once you get into a big tech company, right? So you have engineers, you have junior engineer, senior engineers, lead engineer, principal engineer, then you become an architect, senior architect, and those. So those are, I think, very conventional sort of AI/computer science engineering path. There is another path which is more of the managerial path, right? You become an engineer, then you transition into a manager, senior manager, director, senior director, that type of role. So I don't see a huge difference between software engineering versus AI engineers in terms of career path. And especially in bigger companies, I think they have a very well-defined structure already. There's not a whole lot of differentiator. But again, it varies depending on the person, right? Because for me, the path has been anything but straightforward, right? It's not always a straight path for me. This is especially true because when I was in graduate school and when I graduated, AI was not really a thing yet. Again, no university was offering, AI courses like they do today. So I had to actually learn a lot of these AI fundamentals by myself, right? Whether it's taking courses or looking for information, read papers. So I spent a significant amount of time learning what AI is all about. And for me, no large tech companies would accept me as a software engineer because, frankly, I don't have a computer science background. So I had to start off small with a startup project, which offered me opportunities to do data analyst kind of job, right? analyze their data for quite a while before I was able to get into the whole AI type of work. So I started off very small in startup companies, then grew myself up, gained the experience along the way, and finally got into Fortune 100 company, a large tech company, and then got into consulting. So I would say there is no one straightforward path, but if you have very strong computer science fundamental, you got into a big tech company already, then your path is kind of straightforward if you want to stay with that company. Unless you have this entrepreneurial spirit, and after a couple of years you jump off and you start your own company, that's another career path you can branch into. But I think everybody is kind of different, and depends on the company you're in, and depends on the path you're taking.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting way to look at it. It just, yeah, depends very heavily, I think. I guess I wanted to ask maybe like 2 or 3 questions on the future of AI, and then we can move on to some like audience questions.
Sure.
I guess, well, first of all, in 10 or 20 years, do you think it'll be harder to find a job in AI? Or like, how is this gonna, will it get easier over time? Will it get harder over time?
Yeah. So right now, let's talk about right now, right? The job market right now, if you have some experience in AI already, you don't look for a job will find you. That's the current situation. Like I mentioned before, there's a serious discrepancy between the demand for AI engineers and the available talent pool right now in the job market. If you already have some experience in this field, it's not too difficult to find a job. I get recruiter calls twice a week on average, asking me whether I want to join another company. So there is a serious fight for talents in the market. On the other hand, if you don't have enough background, you should definitely focus on gaining that necessary experience in AI, right? Like I mentioned before, there are various ways to do that. So as far as the trend, is this trend going to keep up? I'm not 100% sure, but from the numbers and the stats that I see, and from my personal experience working with Fortune 500 company, the need for AI talents is not showing any signs of slowing down anytime soon. I would say it's still growing. It's still growing exponentially at this stage, actually. And now I can't guarantee that the job market 20 years from now is still going to be the same. Probably not. But what I can say is that within the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years at least, I will still anticipate to see very strong demands for AI engineers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like from my perspective, getting into a top PhD program for AI is getting harder and harder by the day.
That's
like
true.
You need to have many papers.
That's
like
true.
Top papers.
Yes, the side effect of, unfortunately, of AI being so popular is, the job market is really good, but for prospective students or people who want to get into this field, now there are so many people that try to get into the subject of AI that competitions are now also very tough for students, especially.
Yeah. So I guess I think moving on in terms of, I think we'll like see a lot of cross-pollination in the future between like AI and other fields. Do you think there's like going to be demand for AI engineers that are also good at other things? And like what types of fields might this be?
Yes, I do actually. It's already happening. Especially it's very obvious in consulting work. Every time we engage with a pharmaceutical company or medical device company or a healthcare company, I get asked to be on the call. Why? Because I have a degree in bioengineering, not in computer science. The clients usually want someone to be on the call that understand the industry, especially life sciences. Another example is like advertising industry. Before I joined my consulting firm, I was in an advertising company. I've done quite a few AI projects in the sector. So at the very beginning, when I just joined the consulting practice, everyone who's focused on media entertainment client will look for me because I had the advertising background. So I think everybody nowadays is looking for a mix and match. This is a skill that's I think especially important to have in the future. The more working knowledge you have in other industries, I would say the better it is, because you are no longer this one-dimensional tech engineer. You bring additional value to your company and to your clients.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good thought. I want to, I guess, move on to one like kind of more philosophical question about the future, or like in a career in AI. I think like we see a lot of I don't know if like people in middle school or high school, there's a lot of like TV shows, maybe you've watched Black Mirror, or you've watched other random, like maybe you see what's happening in China right now, like social credit.
Yep.
And you see like, AI being used like weapon systems or other like, predictive policing, to name a few. I guess like, what do you think? Like, do you have any moral thoughts about your job, or like, is like fairness something you think about often? Or I guess like, I don't know, do you think this is something important for people to think about?
Yeah, I think about it a lot, actually. The AI ethics is a huge topic of discussion, right? This is not so there are usually a couple of different ways that we think about this. One is, in industry use cases, typically people think about, oh, you're in this particular industry, so AI ethics is not that important. It's not like you're making a weapon that kills, right? But that's not true. We actually, I worked with a reverse mortgage company for an AI project. And before we even took on the project, we had to ask the mortgage company 100 questions on why do you need an AI application? Do you know why? Because reverse mortgage deals with people. And more seriously, they deal with elders in our community, right? A lot of older people tend to take reverse mortgage. And it's just because of this reason, reverse mortgage really gets a bad rap in the financial services industry, because there are a lot of scams going on, and the sentiment is older people tend to not understand the financial terms very well, so they get scammed, their life savings out of nowhere. So in order for us to actually completely confident and comfortable working with this reverse mortgage company, we first actually had to investigate the company, what the company does. So that's part of the extra work that I think a lot of people are now starting to pay attention to when we talk about AI. This is this AI ethics, right? Where is my model pointing at, right? Is it a person on the other side, or is it something? Right? Usually if it's something, I'm more comfortable doing it. But if it's pointing at someone, right? I always think of the way to evaluate this very simple. I switch places, right? Let's say, what if my parents needs to take a reverse mortgage out? Am I comfortable pointing an AI algorithm at them, right? Is it fair? Is it biased against them? Or is it going to be, a scam that's not going to be very good for them? So we do a lot of this internal evaluations before we even do a project. We have to understand the industry. We have to understand the client, what the clients are doing, to make sure that whatever we're implementing is not bringing this negative effects to the downstream users and to the beneficiaries of these AI models. So that's very important.
Yeah.
There's another whole aspect of this is the bias of AI. And that's something that unfortunately we don't really have a solution to. If you think about it, because AI is really modeled from our data, and our data comes from us, right? People are inherently biased, whether you admit it or not. You have your own personal bias against others or against something else. And when we create these data tend to be biased. And if an AI model learns from these data, the AI model is going to be biased. So there's a pretty big example from, this is now public information, so I can talk about it, from Amazon. I think a couple of years ago when they rolled out this resume screening AI model. And it was a disaster because the AI model automatically screened out anybody who has a female name. Why? Because the model thinks that female tend to have lesser degree of success when applying to Amazon, right? So because there's a male and female imbalance, gender balance issue within Amazon, so they get more male applications through than female applications. And when the machine learning model sees it, they're going to say, okay, so there are more male applications, successful applications, so I'm going to screen out all the female applications. I'm going to disregard this pile and only focus on that pile. So in that case, is it the machine learning's fault? Is it the AI's fault, or is it human fault, right? So there are a lot of considerations when it comes to data bias, model bias. So there are huge amounts of work that are being done to try and prevent that kind of thing from happening.
I definitely agree. I think that it's like very important, especially like as a computer scientist even, or as an AI person in the AI field, that like the impact that you have is so great because like you work on things and it gets pushed worldwide and you just don't see the impact you have. And I think it's like just super thinking about the impact of your work is super, super important. And I think like even if you're not interested in AI, there's this growing need to like to have people in policy positions that are familiar with AI and thinking about AI. And so I think like if you're not interested in the technical aspect, there's still a lot of impact you can make. Like we see like Facebook, you know, all these effects that these systems have, like Facebook, like Instagram on people, on younger people. And like it's very easy to blame Facebook. And it's very easy to say, oh, like Facebook needs to do better. But the truth is that no one knows how to fix it, right? And it's like we need people to think about this. And I think like this is a great thing that you know, if you guys, hopefully you guys can fix this for us. I guess, yeah, I do want to wrap up here. So I'll get to like maybe a few like audience questions right after this, but I guess like just as a wrap-up question, if you were to start your career over now, like what do you think you would do? Like you can like, you know, would you still be in AI? And like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I again, you know, my philosophy in terms of, you know, finding a career for myself is follow my own passion and follow my own interests. So as long as my personality doesn't change, I don't think I'm going to change my career trajectory per se. So it's still going to be very much the same. But that doesn't mean that my approach to my career is going to be exactly the same, right? Because, you know, everybody looks back 10 years of their career, they'll say, oh, I made a mistake here, or I made a mistake there. Maybe I could have done better here, or I could have done better there. So I would say, you know, overall, I will probably still be in the same industry. But I may have changed some things that I've done in the past here and there, small things. So that's kind of my answer.
Yeah, definitely. I think I guess like, and if we wanted to get in touch with you, what would be a good way to do that?
Yeah, search my name on LinkedIn. You can add me. I don't block anybody that tries to add me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, send me a message, and we can go from there.
Cool. Yeah, I guess like I'll ask a few audience questions before we wrap up.
Yep.
I'm not sure how we want to do this. Do we want to? Should I just pick questions, or can people? Yeah, I think I'll just pick a few.
Yeah, if you can pick questions that are relevant to, you know, AI or career or something.
Let's see. Let's take a look. What is your last name?
Wang.
Okay. Yeah, yes. I guess. Let's take a look. And if you have any more like questions, you can ask them now too in the chat. I think we've addressed a lot of these.
Hi, Edward. It's Allison. So I think in the WeChat, in the chat box, they ask a lot of questions regarding the major choosing and about how to get into college manual. So I mean, if you want to answer those questions, you can go ahead too. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I can try to get into some college-related questions. I think that there's like one question is like, the importance of score and grades to international CS and like programming competitions when you apply to universities. I think it's been a little while since I thought about this. I think like scores are somewhat important. They're pretty, I think like some universities care more than others about this. And you'll probably maybe have more success talking to a college counselor about this than me. But I think that it's important to look at things holistically too. But if you have like, you know, some very, very, very impressive score or some very, very impressive award or something, that's definitely will help a lot. But it's like important to ask yourself that like, you know, you're doing this for, you know, because you're interested in it, I think. Yeah, so just like, I don't think there's a formula to get into any of these top schools. And if you want to go to like MIT or Stanford or something, There's no, yeah, like it's a lottery for everyone, right? So it's kind of hard to say. It's like you need to look at it from a case-to-case basis, I think. Just like having a goal, like if you're just like some person just having a goal to like get like Musical Platinum and to like go to like camp or something is maybe not realistic, or maybe doesn't even fit well with you. It's important to tell a story with your application, I think. And like the story needs to involve, like if you say you're interested in something, then like what are the results? Like why, what can you show from your interest? But like on the other direction, if you have some results for something, why is that something you're interested in? Or like, why do you have the results? Why are you focusing on that? Sure, I think, and in terms of like best departments in college for AI education, I think computer science is probably what I would think that you should stick with. I think math is useful, but you can like focus on a lot of math stuff as a CS major. Yeah, I guess like maybe one type of question that Jack can help with is, I saw earlier there's a question with like that asked about quant and how quant is related to the AI field. Like if you're in a quant finance firm, I don't know. I feel like my impression is that a lot of quant firms are very statistics heavy and very like, I mean, you make a lot of money, but I think maybe in a few years there'll be more AI related or more like deep learning AI type things.
Yeah, so I can say a little bit about this because we do work with hedge fund and private equity firms as well. So quant typically, like Eddie said, is very math and statistics heavy, right? They don't utilize as much machine learning or AI for their analysis. And I know that there are a few firms in New York that are trying to build their own sort of AI-based trading pipeline, but none of these are very heavily utilized as of now or in production, simply because, again, very similar to life science. When you put an AI decision-making system into production and it's taking over billions of dollars of trading every single day, you want to evaluate very, very thoroughly. So there are quite a few projects in the financial industry where we're trying to help them build out the system or trying to evaluate their system outcome for them. So that's a major difference. I think AI will start to see very heavy utilization in these financial firms eventually, but right now I think it's still more statistics heavy in terms of their real trades.
Yeah, and I agree. I think like Jane Street always likes to say that like they can die overnight if you have some trading program running in a tight loop and just doing bad trades over and over and over. I guess there's another question. I think like I'm also kind of interested in this. There's a lot of people or a lot of like jobs that or maybe classes that say data analytics and like data scientists or data, a lot of like data related words. Do you have any thoughts on, I guess, the differences or the relationship between like data science, AI?
Yeah. So these are I think very confusing terms, mainly because companies use these sort of terms kind of differently as well. So that's why it's confusing. I would suggest that when you do a job search, don't just look at the job title like data scientist or data analyst or machine learning engineer, but look at the detailed job descriptions to make sure it's a good fit for your skill sets. But the main difference for me is data analysts are the ones that are really only looking at the existing data and trying to analyze, trying to generalize the data or trying to summarize the data to a certain extent. And data analysts usually work very closely with business stakeholders, right? And their core skill sets would be building dashboards or charts and doing SQL queries to get the data out in order to show the business stakeholder what's going on. As far as data scientists and a machine learning engineer, it can be used interchangeably. I think for some companies, data scientists only do statistical analysis work, so it has almost nothing to do with AI. but sometimes other companies use data science to build AI models as well. So again, like I said, do read the fine print of job responsibilities before you apply. There's no set term for people who work in AI. It could be a data scientist, could be a machine learning engineer, or it could be something else. So it depends on the company, it depends on the specific job.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. It seems like there's not very much standardization right now. Like, you know, you might get to some jobs that are data scientists are like, oh, you work at Excel. But yeah, maybe you're not as interested in that. I think there's one question that I thought was interesting about personal projects in AI. If you see a difference between like using AI models by others and building your own. I have one thing to say about this before we pass it off to Jack, I think. Or actually, yeah, Jack, go ahead. You can.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit from the interviewer's perspective. The gist of this is, no, I don't see a difference. Why? Because for one, I think the ones who's using other people's model is probably slightly smarter, I would say, because they skipped a lot of work, a lot of fundamental sort of trial and error work in machine learning. But one thing I will make very clear is if you use somebody else's model or an architecture that's already very well established in your personal project, make sure you know what's going on. Because if I see it, you're using somebody else's model, I'm going to ask how this works. And if you don't know, that's a big red mark for me and for you during the interview process. So I don't really differentiate the quality of your project based on what model you use, but I kind of qualify the project success as how much you actually understand the model that you use.
Yeah, I agree. I think like even though a lot of research is people borrow other people's models. Yeah, I think even like, or I guess like the more specific example, like Junyuan Zhu, the CycleGAN person, he kept saying that like he tried, he couldn't get the model to work, right? And he tried for a month, and then he just looked at some other paper of some similar like model. He borrowed their architecture and it started to work. So it's like a lot of like deep learning is kind of, I think it's more experimental in the sense that like in computer science, you can think about the algorithm and you say, oh, I can prove this works. In deep learning, it's more like maybe biology, where you think this might work, you try it, and then a day later you know whether it worked or not, or maybe you have a bug, and I don't know, it's hard to tell. So yeah, it's I think like, but one concrete thing you can maybe do that would help is a lot of people like to post online about their like maybe even if you don't do a project, like you read some paper and you understand this architecture or some AI based thing, like you should maybe write some blog post about it. Just because like I think one of the best ways to show that you understand something is to like explain it. And so like a lot of people like to post about things they learned on like, I know medium.com is a popular place that people use. And I think this is maybe helpful too. If you have like lots of blogs about these like AI type things, maybe I'm wrong about this. I think that people like employers would like that too. Yeah. Sure. I'm not sure how much time we want to spend more on this. But and like how's the how we're looking at time?
I mean, maybe we can, if you guys, still want to, address several more questions, we either can give them the opportunity to unmute themselves to ask some questions if they want to. And I think we still give maybe another 10 minutes. What do you guys think?
Sure, that works. If you can do that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so for people want to ask questions, just raise your hand so I can unmute yourself. I can unmute you guys. Let's see if anyone want to raise hands and ask questions. So.
Oh, the website address. I mean, like, I don't think the website is very helpful because like you can't really discover very much from this website. But mostly when you search something AI related on Google, this website will be like one of the first places that shows up because a ton of people write blogs here. Yeah. But it's also very annoying because you can't, sometimes you have to pay for it. But yeah.
Hi, Jack. I have a question. Could you address, like, from the perspective of investment, what applications or what subsectors in AI seem to have a sort of like a bigger impact? I know it's a very general question, just curious.
Yeah, so in terms of investment, and I will say, I'll just say that in the past 6 months, we've seen a trend of investment in huge startups with capability of natural language processing, which is, language understanding, basically. And they now have a subfield that's not called natural language processing, but rather called natural language understanding, right? It's not just that, the algorithm AI is able to process through document, but it also has the ability to actually have a conversation with you. I've seen a lot of investment in that. And not too long ago, there's a Microsoft research branch that came out of Microsoft, started their own company, and their particular chatbot is in China. I think it's really adequate at speaking Chinese. It's called Xiaoice. Let me try to find that website. Let me see if I see this. Yeah, I see it. So this particular website I just put in the chat is really unique in that it is looking at speech from a very different angle, which is, this voice sort of assistant is not trying to answer your questions, but rather focus on having a emotionally intelligent conversation with you. So when you're talking with this bot, it's almost like you're talking with a person, and it's been very popular in China. There's a whole lot of investment in this sort of subfield of natural language processing, which is called natural language understanding. Both in the US and in China, I think it's been gaining a lot of momentum. So that's what I see over the past 6 months or so.
Okay, great, thanks. Just to follow up real quick, do you see a lot of promise in using AI in biotech and drug development? Or, well, I mean, part of this, for instance, we heard about machine learning, having the machine read the MRI results or whatever. Any other things that may seem promising as well?
I would say there are some, and we worked very actively with several pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies. Unfortunately, at this point, I think the life science field in its entirety lags slightly behind in terms of implementing AI. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of prototypes, a lot of proof concepts being thrown around, being demonstrated. Like I said, people are generally more careful when it comes to life science industry because they deal with very significant sort of results if AI gets it wrong. So I see a lot of investments being thrown into imaging recognition for X-rays or MRIs. I've seen large companies making their own investment in their own AI division to work on some sort of drug discovery, or there's a particular very interesting project where they used AI to try to determine, in order to treat a certain disease, what kind of chemical composition would be needed. And then they actually manufactured that particular chemical component that came from AI. So a lot of small things going on, but there hasn't been any really big breakthrough, except the one that I mentioned. It's called AlphaFold 2 that came from DeepMind by Google. That's like the largest life science breakthrough we had with AI over the past couple of years. Other than that, small movements, but not a whole lot of groundbreaking type of AI models for this sector.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that a lot of the interesting, or a lot of hot research interest now is on not necessarily prediction, and it's more in generative AI models, or like generation. So if you can, like, drug discovery is more of a generative problem. And then you see like I think there's a DeepMind paper that's like 3 days old at this point. They proved, if any of you know what knot theory is, it's not really a life science thing, but like in math, I think there's a lot of excitement for using AI to discover new theorems to be proved. And there's this really, I think it's a pretty cool paper that's very recent, where someone proved a very unexpected result, I think, in knot theory, based on they used some AI algorithms to do this. And I think that's a very hot field in the future.
That's awesome. Thank you. I don't mean to hog the floor, but this is, I promise, will be the last question. I like to ask this question to anybody I think is, the leader in the field. I'm just curious for Jack and you, Edward, what your parents have done right, or something in your upbringing that helped you develop your intrinsic motivation. I'm asking a question as a mother, so just share whatever you're comfortable with. Thank you.
Sure, I think I can start off with this. I think that it's difficult to this is a difficult question to answer, certainly. I think what happened a lot when I grew up was I would see some like interesting technology, like 3D printing or something, and I'd be like, oh, I want to try this. And I think a big part of this was I think a big thing that's important is just being exposed to certain things, or like knowing that they exist. Because if you don't know that they exist, it's kind of hard to decide like if you're interested in it. And I think like maybe part of this was, a lot of the people that I worked with, or a lot of the people that I interacted with, were also interested in computer science. And so most of my exposure was in computer science, and now look where I am. So I think that it's just, just like providing, I think like not necessarily classes, but just like cool things, or just getting exposure to cool things is very helpful. And like, I think it's like, it's not like you learn something, you need to start with like the, what is the coolest thing, or like, why is this important in the future, I think is very motivating for me.
Yeah, I would say, and I agree with what Eddie said, but also I want to add on to that is to encourage your child or your children to be, you have to be okay with your children exploring different interests, right? Just because, just because, you may be in a certain field and you probably inclined for your kids to go into that field as well. I would say encourage them to explore some other things and be supportive overall, because I think when I was younger, my dad and my parents have helped me do a lot of different things. I played piano, I did calligraphy, I did a lot of different things. Some things I dropped off very early on because I just have zero interest in it. But there are other things that, that really stick. For example, playing piano, I've been playing piano for over 20 years. I almost got into music major in college. That's, that opens up different options. But of course, at the end of the day, I was more interested in engineering. That's why I got into engineering. But I think just being there and be supportive of whatever, your children's interests may be, and giving them a certain amount of resources, I think will definitely help them cultivate this intrinsic sort of motivation, because I remember when I was in high school, I told my dad, I said, I'm really interested in programming. I kind of wanted to learn how that works. And next day I got a bunch of books on my desk, right? So that's really a small investment in your children, but it will make a huge impact in cultivating their interest and their motivation.